Hello everyone. In this lecture, we will be learning to create a navigation header with logo and menu items using float property. First, let's take a look at how the output should look like. So here we have logo on the left and we have menu items on the right. And when we hover over the menu items, we can see the drop down menu, right? We are going to create this navigation header using float property and other concepts that we have learned so far. So let's go to the Sublime text code. In line number 9, we have unordered list, and inside the unordered list we have li elements, right? All the li elements are block elements, and we have used the li block elements for displaying logo. So the first li element is for logo image, and the rest of the li elements are for menu items. Let's go to CSS. In line number 3, the ul element selector is used for styling the navigation header. Here ul element is styled with some background color, and the default margin is removed. Margin is set to 0 pixels, and bullets are removed by using list style type property and is set to none. And height of the header is set to 100 pixels. This ul element is the container for the navigation header, right? So we are using all these properties to style the navigation header. In HTML code, the first li element in line number 12, it has the class name logo, and we have the logo image in it. Okay, so let's go to CSS. In line number 11 in CSS, we have the logo class. We have used float left for this logo class selector because we want to make the logo image display on the left side of the header, right? And we have given some padding. Now going back to HTML code, all the other li elements except the first is for logo image. All the other li elements are for creating the menu items in the header. And if you see, all the li elements are associated with class name menu, right? So this menu class selector is used to style the menu items. In the output, if we see, we can see that the menu items are on the right. Logo is on the left and menu items are on the right. In CSS line number 13, this menu class selector is styled and float is given to right. This is because we want the menu items to be displayed on the right, so float property is set to right, and some padding is given as a shorthand property. In HTML code line number 11, we have a li element, right? Here we can see the text contact. This li element is creating the menu item contact. But do you see, this contact menu item is the last menu item in the output. So we have contact last, and then before that about, before that drop down, and then the first menu item is home, right? Here the contact, which is the last menu item, it is written first, and then below that we have about menu item, and then below that we have drop down menu item. Why are we writing the code in reverse? Why are we having the last menu item code in the first place? This is because we are floating the items to the rightmost end. So contact will be pushed to the right end. About will be on back of it, and then drop down item, and then home. Do you see the point? So here if we write it in a normal way, if we write home and then about and then drop down contact, then home will be pushed on to the right. Since we are using float property to create this navigation header menu items, we have to change the order because the first item will be floated to the rightmost end. Inside each li element, we have a hyperlink, right? Inside the hyperlink, we are giving the menu item name. So this hyperlink text is styled in CSS. So going to CSS, in line number 17, we are using element selector, hyperlink element selector A, and we are removing the underlining, default underlining given for the hyperlink, and then other basic CSS properties are given. These CSS properties are straightforward for you to understand. And then in line number 15, we have hyperlink tag A, that is element selector A colon hover, right? A colon hover. This way of writing the CSS styles, this is called a pseudo class, that is using a special symbol after the selector, in this case colon, and then we have some text after it, right? This is called a pseudo class. We'll look at pseudo class in detail in our later lectures. For now, colon hover property will be applied when hyperlink text is hovered using the mouse. That is, whenever the menu item is hovered using the mouse, this line, line number 15, the style in line number 15 will be applied. So going to the output, whenever we hover over the menu item, we can see the background turns to green and the font color turns to white. So that is what is given in line number 15. So when this hyperlink text is hovered, background color is some shade of green and font color is white, and you can see the text decoration, there is an underlining, right? So text decoration is set to underline. Next we will see how to create drop down menu. So in the output we can see when we hover over some like here this drop down menu item, we can see a drop down menu. How to create this drop down menu? In HTML5 line number 13, inside this li element we have another div. Inside this li element in line number 13 we have another div block with 3 hyperlinks. Another div block with class name drop down content with 3 hyperlinks. So that means we have 3 submenu items for this drop down. That's why we have 3 hyperlinks. And this drop down content div block is placed right under this drop down menu item. How is it styled then? We'll see it in CSS. And one more thing to notice, this drop down content block, div block, it is not displaying always. Only when we hover on the drop down menu option, we see this drop down content block, right? Because we do not want this submenu, drop down menu to appear always. We do not want this drop down content block to be displayed always. Only when the mouse is hovered over the drop down menu option, this block should be shown. So let's go to CSS. Okay, I am going to explain after line number 19. So we are going to see this part. So how this drop down content block is exactly placed under the drop down menu item, and how this drop down content submenu block is displayed only when we hover over the menu item, and it is not displaying every time like always. So we will see that using the CSS code. To place the drop down content block is the submenu block, right? To drop down content is the class selector, is the class name given to the div. So here is the styling of the drop down content block. To place the drop down content block directly under the drop down menu, we have to make the drop down content block's position set to absolute. You remember we can use position property, and if it is set to absolute, it will be removed from the normal flow of the document and we can place the element anywhere we want. Here this drop down content block, its position is set to absolute. We'll come to this line. This line may be confusing. We'll come to that. Here this position absolute in line number 27 means that this drop down content block is given the position absolute, and its parent, which is the parent of this drop down content block, this drop down class selector, this is the parent of this drop down. So in HTML code we can see this li class is given the class name drop down, here drop down, and this div block is the child of this li element. So for this drop down content class selector, its parent is drop down class selector. And the drop down class selector, its position property is set to relative, which means this drop down content block will be placed with reference with its parent drop down. And one important thing here is in line number 21, see here this drop down content block's display property is set to none. Because we do not want to see this block always, only when hovered it should be displayed. In line number 24 is the logic. Here is the logic for displaying the submenu only on hovering. So this line number 24 here, we have used a concept called descendant selector and pseudo class. We will see about this in detail later. Just I am going to brief you about what is happening here. On hovering over the drop down menu item, drop down content block, which is the descendant of drop down class, should be displayed, right? So that is what we are mentioning here. That is when the drop down menu item, this drop down class selector is assigned to drop down menu item, right? So when that is hovered, so dot drop down colon hover, when the drop down menu item is hovered, this drop down content block should be displayed. Here there are two selectors with a space, that is called as the descendant selector. On hovering over drop down menu item, drop down content block, which is the descendant of drop down class, should be displayed. In our case, in HTML file, this drop down content block, this is the child of drop down class, but it can be a grandchild or grandchild since we are using descendant selector. So that means the drop down content must be somehow descendant of the drop down class. So here the display is set to block and position is set to absolute. And since we are setting position to absolute, we are using top and left properties to display the submenu block right under the drop down menu item. So let's go to developer tools to explore this. Here is the parent drop down and its position is set to relative, and here is the child and its display is set to none because we don't see anything now. But when we hover over this, now I am highlighting this. Okay, when we hover over this, now we are seeing this submenu block. Here the display is set to block and position is set to absolute, and top, if I take 74, like if I uncheck top and left properties, you can see it is moved a little bit. So using this top and left properties, we are exactly aligning the submenu block right under its parent drop down menu item. Okay. So going back to Sublime Text, in the HTML code for the submenu block, there are hyperlink text, right? There are hyperlink tags used for creating the submenu items. These submenu items are styled in CSS. So the class name is given as submenu. So going to CSS, in line number 33, the submenu class selector is styled. In line number 34, do you see display set to block? Why have we used display block property for the hyperlink menu items? So let's go to developer tools again. Here I am highlighting this hyperlink, each submenu hyperlink text. So it's dot submenu. This is the class selector, right? So I'm going to uncheck this display block property. What is happening? So the submenu items are displaying next to each other now. This is because the hyperlink A tag, it's an inline element. To convert that inline element into a block element, we have used display block property, right? And then we have given some padding, border, bottom, border radius. All these properties are straightforward and understandable. Hope this is clear for you. If you have any queries, if you have questions, you can feel free to ask me, email me in my email ID designweb solutions, solns@gmail.com. So in this lecture, we learned to create navigation header with logo and menu items. In our next lecture, we will be doing a project. We will be creating a website using all the concepts we have learned so far. Thank you for watching.